Hello, STEM girlies. Welcome back to Computer Science, the podcast that connects ambitious and driven people just like you to the trailblazing women of STEM. So I'm extra excited for this episode because our guest for today is not only studying data science and statistics at Harvard University, but she's also founded the first ever organization bringing young women into venture capital. And so let's give a huge welcome to Isabella Mandis. Currently a junior at Harvard University, Isabella is here to share her incredible journey, experiences, and insights from high school thus far with all of us today. So whether you're exploring a career in STEM, and or business, or just looking for inspiration, this episode is packed with wisdom you won't want to miss. Let's dive right in. So Isabella, you've accomplished a huge amount at such a young age. Could you start by talking a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yes, of course. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. So, I started very young. I started to learn how to code when I was in about lower school. I love technology. I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with Apple. This is around the time that iPhones were coming out. So, I just realized that technology could really accomplish so much and change people's lives and wanted to be a part of that. So, at the time, thought that the way to do that was to learn how to code. Ended up doing that, launching or joining a bunch of different programs. I was really involved with Girls Who Code when I was younger, and kind of realized that there were other ways to build things, not necessarily just like programming. People were actually building like companies at a young age. And so a mentor of mine was a student at Stanford at the time, and she had a lot of friends who were building companies, and it was crazy to me to see that someone could be 18, 19, 20 and be building a company that was going to change the world. And so she ended up connecting me to a bunch of those founders. I would help them on their projects, kind of do work for them, and then I just loved doing that, speaking to founders, started reaching out to more people, would have a little notebook of people I spoke to and why their company was interesting and what I learned from it and all of that. And so that was kind of my first exposure to venture capital. Ended up doing more research on what it was, but it was really hard to break into the field as a high schooler. And so when I got to college, stepped on campus here at Harvard 2.5, almost 3 years ago, I wanted to pursue that, wanted to find the founders on campus and be able to support them. And so started joining the different venture capital clubs, going to them, going to events both at Harvard and in the Boston area, and noticed that basically every single event I was the only girl. And so decided to do something about it. You know, I had been exposed to that in technology and STEM and didn't know that was the case for other fields as well. I definitely didn't think of myself as like a business or finance person. And so I ended up starting a community called Girls into VC my freshman fall. We're the first organization bringing young women into venture capital. And so started that very early. Now we've been growing, have over 8,000 members and different chapters across the country and the world, and have different programming and events and all of that.
Amazing. That is a beautifully spoken introduction. So, in this podcast, we've interviewed multiple guests studying computer science, data science, stats, but venture capital is a new one. So, when I think of venture capital or VC, I think of investing. I know it's a form of providing like equity or money to a startup, correct? This kind of sounds like angel investing to me. So is venture capital similar to angel investing, or is it completely different? So in your own words, how would you describe venture capital?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as kind of a scale. So, angel investing is a type of investing in founded companies, but angel investing is an individual who's writing that check. So, that's a person, you have to qualify as a accredited investor. So, you have to have like over a certain amount of income to actually angel invest. So once you're an accredited investor, you're able to angel invest. That is one person writing a check with their own money. Venture capital is the same general idea, but where it's different is that venture capitalists get money through like endowments or funds, or generally high net worth individuals, and then on behalf of them they write checks into startups. And so people, angel investing is like an individual writing a check with their own money, and that typically happens like a very, very early stage in a company, just because realistically like the checks are smaller. Whereas venture capitalists are writing checks on behalf of money that they've kind of gained and collected in a fund. And then they're writing bigger checks into those companies on behalf of the limited partners or LPs who are the people that gave them their money. And so in venture capital firms, typically there are multiple people working at them. This is their full-time job. They're hoping to get returns on behalf of people. So they actually have like a duty to get returns, where angel investing is more of like people, maybe they know the people that have started the company, they want to support them, maybe it was a friend they went to college with that now starting a company, where venture capital is like people's job. They need to get high returns, they want a certain value to be able to provide to the people who've given them money. So angel investing I like to think of as like the very beginning of a scale. Then it goes into venture capital, and then at the end of the scale is private equity, which is thought of as like more traditional finance. And private equity is when the company is like much bigger, and because of that they write like a much bigger check and also typically buy out the company or buy a very high percent, where venture capitalists are typically taking about like roughly 10% of a company, much smaller percent, and the founders really the ones still running it. Where private equity, they're really buying like a majority stake in the company, and angel investing is like a much smaller percent.
That's very good to know. That definitely cleared up a lot of things because I did not know anything about venture capital until kind of I researched about this and I was like, whoa. Okay, so thank you so much for clearing that up. I'm sure our viewers are also really glad with your explanation. It was really nice. So, the business side of things is very cool. But how did you venture into these STEM fields? See what I did there? Venture from VC. So, how did you find yourself interested in data science, and how are you now studying computer science, data science, and those like statistics fields?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I never would and still wouldn't consider myself a business person in the slightest. I definitely consider myself more of a STEM person. I mean, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I just really like the idea of building things and how people can enact change. And like, you can build something, I mean, especially now with AI, like, you can literally build something in minutes, put it out into the world, and be making impact and changing people's lives and making people's lives easier. And so that was just really exciting to me, and wanted to see how I could actually do that. And so started to learn when I started to learn to code when I was younger, and kind of pursuing that. And then realized that, you could be a software engineer, but I felt like I wanted to be more connected to the product and the people building it and the team and supporting that, rather than like me myself kind of coding every day. And so that's how I got more into the like intersection of venture and business and startups and everything. I came into college thinking I was going to do computer science. I was definitely, it's weird, and this comes to like being a woman in the field. Even though I had a lot of experience in high school coding, I was still terrified to do it in college. And I had been in all woman spaces when I'd coded before, and I was really scared about coming to college and coding, and scared the classes would be so hard. I mean, even in the introductory computer science class, I was terrified about it. And like, I totally like knew everything. I shouldn't have been scared in the slightest. And so I definitely think coming into college, like, I wanted to do computer science, but was definitely like a little scared too, for sure. And then on the data science and stats type of things, I took a class in statistics my senior year of high school, mostly just because I always really liked math growing up, and my school offered statistics senior year. And so for me, I was like, I any day will take statistics over doing like a history class. And so ended up taking that, really enjoyed it. I love math. And then when I got to college, there was a club here, which is like a data science club, and I learned about data science and how it's like coding but more applied, and you're able to make graphs and visualize data and all of these things. And that was something that seemed really interesting to me. And I feel like most classes here at Harvard in computer science are more theoretical and learning about, memory and technology and all of these things, and less so like building apps or building websites or things like that. And so to me, I really enjoyed data science from that perspective. And then data science was under statistics, so kind of ended up doing that. Realized that statistics in college was a lot different to statistics in high school, sadly. But I was really excited to kind of be doing the data science, and still love it.
That's amazing. So I actually love the fact that you brought up being a woman and doing computer science or anything with STEM in general in college. When you're with an all girls community when you started off? You said you did a lot of stuff in all girls communities. So there's Girls Who Code, there's Code with Klossy. And I
Yeah.
feel like there it's a lot more supportive and collaborative, but even with, all the progress that we've made in society, there's still a gender gap. And whether you're in a CS class, CS club, CS company in college or high school, the number of girls compared to the guys in the room can be very few. So have you noticed this happening a lot? And then with when it's happening, it can be hard to kind of stay confident, right? And so gathering that voice to speak up and like saying your things nice and strong, have you found that happening? And what are some tips if you found that?
Interesting. So I find this in all of my STEM classes, not just computer science. I went to an all-girls school growing up and was very like I would always be the person with my hand raised and the teacher would say like anyone but Isabella. Like I always loved school. I loved speaking in class. I was pretty shy growing up, but I feel like school was something that I excelled in and I always wanted to raise my hand and all of that and even ask questions. And it was funny because, I always heard these things about women not speaking up in the classroom and I had never really been exposed to that, frankly. And then when I got to college, I totally noticed it. And it was always the girls who were the smartest in my STEM classes, and none of them would raise their hands to answer a question when they all very clearly knew it. And it was so interesting for me because that was really, you always hear that, but being confronted with it was so interesting. I think what I would say as a way to like combat that is on the first day of class raising your hand. I think that the further the semester it goes in the semester, it becomes harder and harder to speak because then you feel more and more pressure of your first comment and you think that it has to be, groundbreaking and everything like that. Like I truly, truly think that just putting your hand up and asking a really bad question or making like a not good comment, like just say something the very, very first class, because if you do that, then it kind of takes the pressure away, I found in my experience. Also sitting very close to the front, kind of like a nerdy thing, but I truly find that when I sit near the front or like even in the first row, or typically I like to do like the second row, when you raise your hand, you don't see all the people behind you. You really feel like it's you and the professor. And so when you have a question, you'll raise your hand and you kind of feel like it's a one-on-one conversation. Where I found that if you sit back more and you raise your hand, then you see everyone like turn and look at you, and that is just so much added pressure. And so I think the closer you can actually sit to the front is really helpful. I think also just practicing general speaking helps. So, I was very shy, and when I started Girls into VC, I would get on a lot of calls with people, reaching out to them on LinkedIn and things like that. And that, doing that 10 times a day with different calls, like then raising my hand in a class was the least terrifying thing I could possibly do. And so I think that like truly the more practice you get, the more times you just raise your hand, the better and better it will get. And like I truly think like if you have a question, absolutely 10 other people have that question and 10 other people have much stupider questions than you do. And so I truly think like just ask any question because otherwise you will be confused.
For sure. I love those practical tips that you gave to speaking up the first day, because that kind of creates an impression like you're somebody who's going to say what's on their mind, somebody who's going to ask questions. So that's definitely great. And then sitting close to the professor and sitting up front is so helpful. I do this too. I know it is so nerdy to do that, but it definitely helps. Like it's a huge tip that I would recommend everybody does. So with CS, data science, statistics, these are all super math heavy, logic heavy. You have to be smart, you have to be hardworking, put in the reps. We know that. But are there any underlooked qualities extremely important for achieving success in STEM, but you think are not mentioned or talked about as much?
Yeah, I mean, I think public speaking, like I mentioned, is so important. I was actually talking to someone about this today, and I was saying how I wish that I did like something like debate in high school and like had more experience standing up and speaking and explaining your ideas because, when you're very early on, if you want to be a software engineer, like you might think you're just sitting alone in a room, but really that's not the case. And, you have to be able to communicate to people to be able to progress in your career. One day hopefully you'll be managing someone and all of that. And so I think the soft skills is something that I really tried to develop in college, and I was more so in high school focused on like the technical skills of, knowing the certain math and things like that. I think also, in school you can get so hung up over the very specific, like, in math, do you know this concept, or do you know what a derivative is, or all of these things, where realistically, unless you're working in like a very specific like quant job, and especially now with technology and people using like AI on the job or Googling on the job, there's not much that you're learning that you will like actually need to repeat in the real world. And I think I wish I focused more on just the general like problem solving idea and feeling like you're getting smarter every day. It doesn't really matter if what year World War II, like what month World War II ended in, but thinking about, these things helps you be a better person. And thinking, in math, maybe, you won't be tested on what a derivative is when you're working, but, thinking about how you're able to solve those problems will help you solve other problems later in life. And so I wish that I kind of had more of an emphasis on that growing up.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Communication, I think, is so important in every field. And I really like how you phrased knowing when you're solving a math problem, not how to actually solve that math problem, but solving problems in general, that kind of mindset. That is a different, unique perspective. So when I'm doing my math worksheet, I'll think about that. So I'm sure many other people relate to this question as well. I on a split between pursuing computer science versus pursuing business or finance, stuff with like venture capital related. But since you have experience with both, what do you think are some pros and cons to each field, and what type of person would you recommend goes into CS versus goes into business?
Yeah, I think especially now, you can't really get one or the other. Like, technology is so, so, so important. And, people now are dying for people that understand how technology works. And so I really do recommend like having an understanding of both. I think that like technology on the like CS side and like generally, you know, even if you're not coding, like understanding technology, understanding the problem solving is immensely helpful. And then on the business side, like I think that understand like generally operating something, so like running something, running a company, having a job, executing on that is something that's also really helpful. So I think that there needs to be more, and this kind of doesn't really answer the question, but I think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on the intersection of the two and less so people who can do one or the other. Like, I think that there are a lot of people who can code and a lot of people who can make a financial model, but, having someone who can really do both, I think is extremely valuable.
Oh, yeah. I know, because we're hearing everything in computer science is kind of being taken towards like the AI stage, right? So, do you think that AI is something that you would recommend somebody to focus on, or is it more those personable qualities that you think going into the future, just like a futuristic take, would be more prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, AI, of course, right now is a buzzword, and I think it's important to understand it, but really it goes back to like the general problem solving and being able to kind of use tools to your advantage and understanding like the fundamentals of computer science to me is more so important, like the problem solving, than like can you code a algorithm, like machine learning algorithm that uses AI. So I think generally like being more higher level, but I mean, if you're able to really get in the weeds of AI and like build something cool, like that is awesome. You will be so successful. But I definitely think that like being on the more like general step back side of things is just as good. But I am like absolutely a big believer in AI in the future, but I think that it is like AI X every other field. So AI X finance is going to just become finance and it's going to intertwine with everything. So I try not to think about AI as like an independent like vertical in these fields and more so like something that is just supplementing everything that's already existed.
For sure. So, with such a busy life, how do you balance your time between university, work, any clubs that you're in? You have your own organization. and your personal and social life?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely the hardest thing, and definitely doesn't stop. I mean, it happens in high school, it happens in college, it happens even more so when you're older and if you have a family. I think that one is realizing like you can't do everything. And I think, especially when I started Girls into VC, I kind of had to accept that very early on and prioritize things in my life. And so, you know, one, prioritizing sleep is so important and not spreading yourself too thin. I see way too many people coming to college or being in high school and trying to do everything. And I think when you try to do everything, you just do everything badly. And, there's no point of having 50 things on your resume if all of them are like you're somewhat involved or you drop the ball on. It is way better to have 2 3 max things that you're actively doing that you can actually prioritize. And then I live by my calendar. Everything is in my calendar. I think that being able to kind of realize what you need to do and like time block it in your calendar, because you only have so much time in the day. And so when you start putting in like, okay, it takes me X amount of time roughly to do my math homework, I'll put that in the calendar. X amount of time to do my English homework. And then you kind of realize like how much time you have, and like not saying yes to everything because you just like physically don't have time in your calendar. But I think it's important to realize your priorities. And so for me, with Girls into VC the past couple of years, like that has really been my priority over school, in terms of the fact that, like, of course school is important to me. I go to all my classes, I do all my work, but if I can stay up, if I know like I can spend an extra 5 hours on my studying for a test, then I'll increase a couple percentage points. In high school, I would have absolutely done that. In college now, I rather put those 5 hours towards Girls into VC, or towards hanging out with my friends, or towards just relaxing. And so I think you really have to realize that like it's okay if I do slightly worse on this thing because I'm prioritizing this other thing. But when you tell that to yourself, you don't feel bad about not doing well in everything. And so I think just trying to create a balance and as much of like a routine you can.
Yes, I love that. So this is a great segue into high school too. High school years can be incredibly formative. So what are some of the leadership roles or internships or just opportunities that you leveraged during high school that you think helped shape who you are today?
Yeah, so in high school, I'd say my first half of high school was very focused on computer science things. So I was really involved with Girls Who Code. I did programs like that. Outside of school, I did a lot of coding and building and things like that. And then the latter half of high school was also COVID time for me. So a lot was remote. I ended up doing more like projects. So I worked on research in high school. I worked on a paper to reduce machine learning biases. I also ended up doing research with a couple of different professors, helping them with their work. So I was more so focused on like applying the skills that I had previously learned. And then I also would reach out to founders and help them on their projects, worked for a bunch of different startups throughout high school as well. So those were kind of like the main things I did. I'm thinking if I'm missing anything. Um, yeah, and then I did random things like ran the computer science club in my school as a part of the newspaper, things like that. But I would say generally it was more on like the coding thing, helping with the research, doing my own research were like the main things I focused on.
Yeah, awesome. So, high school is great, right? That's your foundation for finding yourself, figuring out what you want to do, and just getting your first step into leadership. But college presents even more opportunities. So, is there any resources or opportunities that you found most helpful from your college experience that you think maybe has helped you delve deeper into either your computer science or business interests?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. When I got into Harvard, I was obviously so excited to come, but I was also extremely stressed because I felt that at Harvard, at a school like Harvard, you have so many opportunities handed to you. And I really wanted to take advantage of everything. And it is so overwhelming with the amount of resources. And also being able to like even know what exists is so overwhelming. So I spent the whole summer like looking every single club that existed, every single programming, going on the website, reading through everything, going through every single class that was offered, making a list of what interests me. Like it is so overwhelming with the amount of resources that are in college. And I went to a very small high school as well. So I didn't even get to choose my own classes, let alone like all of these other opportunities. And so I think that, being able to figure out what, you don't need to know what you want to do. And I think I also was stressed about that coming to college, where so many people do not know what they want to do. Even at a school like Harvard, like people have no idea. But I think even figuring out like remotely what you're interested in, like I knew coming in that I absolutely like was not going to major in English or history or something like that. And so when I was looking at, the major requirements, I kind of figured out like, okay, what classes can I take my freshman year that kind of will count for any of the majors I'm remotely interested in, and things like that to kind of keep your doors open for opportunities. But I feel like being at Harvard, Boston is amazing. There's so many startup events and people that come to campus, which has been great. A lot of guest speakers, a lot of really cool classes. We have very few startup and like entrepreneurial classes, but the ones we have been amazing. So yeah, I just think like being aware of all the resources and opportunities you have is the first thing, because I know so many people who aren't even aware of things and they can't take advantage of them. And so making a long list of like everything that remotely could possibly interest you and then kind of going and exploring those.
Yeah, I love lists. It helps you be so organized. And so I really like that. And then I also know that you got selected to be on the MBA fund. So what does that entail?
Yeah, so my freshman year when I like came into college thinking I wanted to pursue venture capital, I found this program called the MBA Fund, which is a fund through the business schools. It has students from Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. And it's a fund, so they raise money and invest in student and alumni founders. So my specific group was focused on Harvard students and alumni. So we would go find students and alumni of all different colleges, the undergrads, business school, grad schools, anything. And we would meet and decide which companies we would want to invest in, which was really awesome. And that was my first like hands-on experience in the VC world. And also, the undergrad and the business school at Harvard are pretty separated. And so it was really awesome to be able to have opportunities to be on the other side of the river and get closer with the business school people and learn from them.
That is very cool. So, Isabella, you've made it onto Forbes. Congratulations! This is such a huge milestone, and I'm sure our viewers are craving to know your experience with being on a platform like Forbes is. So, at least I'm craving to know. So, what do you think helped you make it on this Forbes list, and what was your experience overall from, doing your first nomination to actually making it?
Yeah, so I was on the Forbes 30 under 30 Boston list, which was awesome and totally a dream come true. I would look at the 30 under 30 list growing up and see all these people who were building these really awesome companies, and it was always so inspiring to me, and would connect with them and learn from them and all of that. And so many were so kind to me. And so that was something that always like held a special place in my heart. And so getting the opportunity to be on the other side of things was just so amazing. The process was like nominations and then interview. I had to submit a lot of info about I received it for Girls into VC, so submit a lot of info about Girls into VC, what we've done, what we've accomplished, all of that. But yeah, it was super exciting.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So, with any amount of success comes challenges and failures along the way. Can you share a time where you faced a significant obstacle in your journey and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many in my life generally. I think with Girls into VC, especially at the beginning. So I started Girls into VC by just posting on LinkedIn and making a quick website. And so really had like no offering at the time. It was very much so just like put your email here if you're interested in venture capital. And so I definitely had so many failures in the beginning because I didn't really know what we were meant to do. And so a lot of it was just trying something, seeing it. If it failed, then start it over. So one of the failures I had was when we started. So when we first started was over winter break of my freshman year. And we started doing Zooms online with the community, and we'd have a guest speaker come and kind of answer questions and everything. And it was great for the winter break. And then when we hit, school going back, I realized that like was on the Zoom, our speaker was there, and like I think like two people showed up, which was obviously not ideal. And so that was a moment where I like felt like a failure because, this awesome woman had taken time out of her day to come and speak to everyone, and it just like no one was there. And so I ended up like kind of hitting the drawing board, realizing that it wasn't like an interest issue, it was just like a time issue with people in classes and everything. And so kind of decided to instead go to a podcast format where people could kind of listen asynchronously. But I think throughout the whole thing with any failure, it's a matter of like, and this is like exactly what a startup is, like putting out something, seeing what happens, and then starting over, and like hitting the drawing board and fixing it, and really listening to people and having everything be like a trial, and kind of testing and iterating based upon that.
Well, yeah, just kind of figuring out what went wrong and then rerouting. That is a great skill to have. So, our next question is a recurring question among our viewers. Everyone has big dreams, everyone wants to start these amazing organizations, do a lot of cool stuff, but resisting the temptation to spend away full blocks of time on our phones is a struggle for many. Like, you'll plan out your whole calendar, but then just resisting that temptation can be quite hard. So, what are some tips you would give to your younger self for prioritizing getting work done?
Ooh, I think it's so hard. And I'm definitely a victim of like watching TV, spending time on my phone. I spend way too much time on TikTok. I think I'm a big fan of writing out goals. Like where do you want to be, and working backwards. So if I did this even looking back to high school. Like if I want to make it to X college, like I'll look and see what the people that are there now did in the past. And same for now. If I want to one day raise a VC fund, like what have the people who've done that done? And then you can kind of work your way backwards and be able to achieve that. And then from this like big goal, create more like smaller milestones. And typically I found that from this and my goals and my smaller steps, what I thought would happen has never happened. I've never like made these goals that I thought would lead me to this path, but it's put me on an even better path. So I think that it's important to have goals, have ambitions, have things that you want to do, have a plan, but know that like you don't need to stick to that plan. I never in a million years thought I'd end up at Harvard. I'm so happy I'm here. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else, but it wasn't a part of my plan. And so I think it's important to have goals, write them down. People are a big fan of mood boards. I've never done that, but I think just having like being able to work yourself backwards helps kind of put you on this path. And also talking to people and like hearing advice from them and people who have done what you want to do will always kind of know things to help you avoid so you don't go down the same rabbit hole that they did is also very helpful.
For sure, that is incredible advice. Kind of looking at your goals, because when you have that vision of the future, then it's like intrinsic drive to, get off your phone. So thank you for sharing that. Lastly, this does bring us to the last question of the podcast. If you could have a heart-to-heart, girl-to-girl conversation with an aspiring girl in the data science, statistics, or VC fields, what real, unfiltered advice would you give her?
Yeah, my advice to everyone is to start something and put yourself out there. So exactly like how you've started this podcast, like I tell people, start a newsletter, start a podcast, reach out to people. Like reaching out to people and starting something, when you've started something, it's the best excuse to reach out to someone. But just generally reaching out to someone and learning from people is like absolutely the best thing to do. And when you start something, you have something that work on, it's your own, you're building something, you'll learn so many skills from that, but also the skills from, if you're starting a podcast, posting every week or every other week, or a newsletter, posting every week, that consistency is something that will train you. And if you look at most of the top startup founders who like their first company was successful. If you look, it actually wasn't like, maybe it was their first company, but they had built a ton of side projects and built things before that led them to where they were. So you'll find that people have experience of like, people who build things and start things have had that kind of experience and building that muscle. And so getting that as early on as you can is something that I think is super helpful.
For sure. Thank you again for sharing that. And a huge thank you to you, Isabella, for being so open and authentic with us today. It was so fun having you on Computer Science, and your stories, tips, and unfiltered advice were absolutely inspiring and so motivational. So thank you for being here. It was a great conversation. I personally enjoyed it very much. And then to all our listeners, thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and leave us a review. It helps us connect more ambitious girls to amazing STEM role models. Until next time, keep reaching for the stars and chasing those dreams. See you soon on Computer Science.